This is the last word, and I'm Marya, Shakil. In a big win for the Adani Group, the Supreme Court on Wednesday said that the report by the OCCRP, an organization funded by billionaire George Soros, among others, can't be the basis for doubting the capital markets regulator SEBI's investigation into the Hindenburg case. Delivering the judgment, a Supreme Court bench of Chief Justice of India D.Y. Chandrachud and Justices J.B. Pardiwala and Manoj Misra said there were no grounds to transfer the probe to a special investigation team. That is the SIT. The Supreme Court also ordered the government and SEBI to check whether Hindenburg has ignored rules in shorting the market and to take action accordingly.
A win for the Adani Group after the Supreme Court refused to transfer the investigation being carried out by market regulator SEBI into Hindenburg Research's allegations of accounting fraud and shell companies against the Adani Group to a separate special investigating team, saying the power of the court to enter the regulatory domain of SEBI is limited. In a clear verdict, the Supreme Court said, the facts don't warrant the transfer of probe from SEBI. The court backed the panel report that has said there was no price manipulation by the Adani Group and added that newspaper and third-party reports can be inputs but not evidence.
It's a complete exoneration of the Adani Group. The court has said that it trusts SEBI. It does not warrant any CBI or any other police investigation as demanded in the 4 writ petitions, and no other material was found to warrant any other investigation.
Supreme Court has given 3 months for SEBI to conclude investigation into the remaining 2 allegations and take the investigation to their logical conclusion in accordance with law.
The Supreme Court also ordered the government and SEBI to check whether Hindenburg has ignored rules in shorting the market and to take action accordingly. Adani Group Chairman Gautam Adani welcomed the Supreme Court verdict in the Hindenburg row, saying that truth has prevailed and that we are grateful to those who stood by us. In a statement, the Adani Group said that there was an attempt to set a false narrative by a manipulative presentation of matters. Bureau Report, NDTV.
And joining us now is senior advocate and one of the sharpest legal minds and former Solicitor General of India, Harish Salve. Mr. Salve, really appreciate your time. What, according to you, is the big message that is coming out of the Supreme Court verdict on the Hindenburg issue?
Today's judgment is more than just a vindication of Adani or a vindication of India Inc. as such. It restores the supremacy of 2 important principles, the rule of law and the separation of powers. Under the rule of law, unsubstantiated allegations, bazaar gossip, media speculation are all inputs for regulators and investigating agencies. They are not evidence on which courts can act. Statutory authorities, statutory regulators, investigating agencies must be left free to act, free from intervention by the highest court. Hopefully, the 2 principles having been restored, investors will heave a sigh of relief, India Inc. will heave a sigh of relief, and democracy will grow and prosper in India.
Mr. Salve, do you think that this will set the right precedent that interests of Indian investors are protected and cushioned against such targeted short sellers?
The SEBI's job is, however, far from done. The SEBI is a regulator whose job is to protect Indian markets. The first allegation was Indian markets need to be protected from the kind of practices which Adani was alleged to have indulged in. The second, which affects Indian markets, is conspiracies to hurt India Inc. Because after all, the market is a reflection of India Inc. That is also a part of SEBI's job. This nexus between the NGO and Hindenburg, was this a coincidence or was there something more? It's not a matter to speculate. The third is for the market regulator to take to task those who have profited out of this misadventure, the short sellers. Frankly, I fail to understand why that has not already been done. The only explanation appears to be that because of the proceedings in Supreme Court and the spotlight being put on Adani, the market regulator focused its attentions on the allegations against Adani. The time has now come to focus the spotlight on those who made money. In today's system of transparent trading, it's not difficult to find those who made money. So all this should be investigated to root out those who trade in the miseries of others.
Mr. Salve, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And I'm going to go straight to Washington, D.C., where Krishnamurthy Subramanian, Executive Director of International Monetary Fund and a former Chief Economic Advisor, is joining us live. Professor Subramanian, really appreciate your time. With the Supreme Court asking SEBI to probe short seller report, that is the Hindenburg report, that whether it violated and caused harm to investors, do you think suitable action must be taken so that it acts as a deterrent, sir?
Very good evening, viewers, and thank you, Marya. You would recall, Marya, when the Hindenburg report had come, I had written a piece in the Times of India putting into perspective the gross misjudgment or maybe other motives with which Hindenburg had called the Adani saga as the worst fraud in history. I think today's verdict clearly shows that that was something that was a complete figment of imagination. And by directing SEBI to take care of this matter by looking at whatever abnormalities and misdemeanors that might have been committed by Hindenburg and other associates, I think the rule of law has actually been upheld significantly, and it's great both for India Inc. and for the India growth story.
So how do you really ensure that the interests of Indian investors is protected? Because the court said that SEBI and the government should take into consideration the recommendations that were made by the committee to strengthen interest of the Indian investors. They suffered a massive loss.
Two things, Marya, I think we have to keep in mind. First, all investors and retail investors who invest in stock markets are always aware that stocks are actually a risky bet. There is some risk involved. It's unlike a fixed deposit, and so they have to always invest with their eyes open. When they gain, they also actually can, have to be ready to lose sometimes, and oftentimes, maybe because of nefarious, activities like the one that Hindenburg might have indulged in. But the second crucial aspect is that, there's been a significant correction in the stock price after the decline following the Hindenburg report. And so, investors have actually recuperated significantly their losses. A crucial point that I want to bring in here is, the role of several commentators, including folks that have occupied, august offices in India previously, in building up such narratives. Let me give you a specific example. People talk about cronyism and such stuff. Yesterday, there's a New York Times article also, which where someone is mentioning about the 2 A's. So let's take a perspective here. If you look at the United States, Apple's valuation has increased by 3 trillion from 2010 to now. In that period, the GDP of the US has increased by about 10 trillion, from 15 trillion to 25 trillion. In other words, 30% of increase in US GDP is accounted for by Apple. Do you call the United States a crony market, a crony capitalistic society? In contrast, if you look at Adani over the same, period, the contribution of Adani to India's GDP, increase would be about 1%. So, we have to be very careful that such commentators with vested narratives, vested interests, do not, push the narratives like this. And I think that is as critical, from a macroeconomic perspective.
Yes, let me, I would like you to elaborate a little bit more on that specific point that you're talking about, narrative setting. Do you think that narrative setting was done for vested political interests? And that is the reason why we saw that kind of upheaval of sorts, in which questions were raised about the conduct of SEBI as well. And would you say that the Supreme Court verdict actually reinforces the confidence that people of India have on these institutions?
I think this entire episode clearly demonstrates that rule of law is absolutely being followed in India. I cannot talk for people who actually do these activities with various designs, various vested interests, but I think it's crystal clear that if 30% of the contribution to US GDP increase from 2010 to now is accounted, let's say, for by Apple's market capitalization increase, then what are we talking about when all these commentators talk about cronyism, etc.? It's a simple fact that when a country's GDP grows, some companies actually which are implementing their businesses well, their valuations will grow. So this entire narrative, and today I saw a Bloomberg article as well, which actually is as poor in its analysis and talks about similar stuff. These are all folks with vested interests who don't seem to enjoy the India growth story doing so well. So
then how will India be countering that? My question is, since you are in Washington, D.C., and I'm sure you're privy to many of these reports that are coming out, what kind of mechanisms should be put in place?
I think, as I mentioned earlier, the Adani saga is a brilliant example. The law took its own course. The Supreme Court directed SEBI to go and investigate, and SEBI is rightfully the regulator to actually go and examine this. And so, in any instance like this, the law should take its own course. And and over time, many people were jumping up and down. When the Hindenburg report had come, all of them have been put to silence now with the report that has come in. So I think the bottom line is very clear. Actually, just put our head down, ensure that rule of law is implemented, all the checks and balances are implemented, and when the Indian elephant walks, there will be actually many other animals that will be barking. Let them bark.
And would you say that there are measures which are needed to perhaps protect investors?
I think that is the job of SEBI, which it has been doing very well, and let SEBI do its job on this, as the Supreme Court has already directed it to do.
Would you say that this judgment will put this entire issue to closure, or will there be some more chatter around it?
Look, Marya, as I've said, those with vested interests will continue chattering. Today, some months back, it was Adani. They'll find something else. So as I said, some of this chattering will happen, of course, because the India growth story actually is doing so well. I think we should just continue putting our head down and grow. And that is the best answer to all these, naysayers.
Okay, my last question to you before I let you go. I know you're in the middle of something, and I'm grateful that you could give me time for this interview. How much of the interest was there world over, particularly because of this? The global investors, how much were they viewing this with anticipation, the Supreme Court verdict? What was the nature of anticipation around it?
Overall, this episode, at the time when it happened, there was a lot of interest. But events since then have clearly laid out that the rule of law has taken its course, and I think that will definitely strengthen investor sentiment that processes are being followed, and the regulating agencies who are responsible for ensuring smooth conduct of capital markets have been directed to do their regulatory activities by the highest court in the land, and that will definitely give a strong signal to investors that India growth story is actually being embellished by rule of law being followed in cases like these.
Right, Professor Subramanian, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts. Joining me now is Ambrish Baliga, and we also have Ashok Kumar Lahiri. He is the member of 15th Finance Commission and former Executive Director of Asian Development Bank. Beginning with you, Mr. Lahiri, how do you think the banking sector will be viewing it, particularly the investors? Mr. Lahiri,
so the first thing that comes to my mind is that I could hear you. I'm just speaking. Can you hear me?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Gotcha. Okay. The first thing, I think the Hindenburg report and the aftermath of it, there'll be many reports written on that. There'll be PhDs. And I think the Supreme Court, that's the final word. That's the highest court in the land, and Mr. Salve has said how this is legally absolutely correct. Here, my point is that regulation is a new thing in India. And the regulatory culture has to be allowed to grow. You can't cast aspersions on the regulator and say we don't trust them, let someone else do it. So I'm extremely happy with the Supreme Court judgment that they have reposed confidence in the Supreme Court, in the SEBI, and SEBI is going to give the report. Second thing that comes to mind is whether the people who were shorting Adani, they were caught in a bear trap because the price went down and then quickly recovered. So there must be people who are regretting the fact that they sold it when it declined for some time, because Adani stocks are again up. Let me add a third point to it. In a developing country, there is always jealousy. Right from our childhood, we have heard how the millionaires, at that time it was Birla and Tata, it was very common custom in gossips and drawing rooms that these are all thieves, they've done all sorts of wrong things. So any guy who is coming up from very low level with entrepreneurship and making a lot of money, there'll be aspersions cast on them that it's not their quality, but it's some kind of wrongdoing. Now when it comes to investor, your question was about investor.
That's right.
I think the investors should be very happy, because if you look at the market mood index, see that it divides into 4 groups. One is extreme fear, the other is fear, third is greed, and the fourth is extreme greed. Right now I think we are in the greed period, whereas you have seen the P ratio I think is around 25.
Okay.
Now 25 is not an all-time high, but P ratio is quite good. And I think only the Czech Republic has got a higher P ratio.
Let me bring in Mr. Baliga as well. Mr.
So
Baliga, would you also
is going
say
to grow.
that there is a need for ensuring protection to investors, and there is a need to probe the short sellers and the vested interest behind it so that the truth comes out? Because the loss amount is 4 lakh crores.
No, that's true. But then, there is a need to probe as to who the short sellers were and bring them to book. But protect investors may not be, because, I mean, see, whenever there's news like the Hindenburg report, those specific stocks collapse. And you really can't hold the regulatory bodies responsible as the news flow is free. It can come from anywhere. I mean, you have social media across, wires pick it up, and you really can't stop the investing public from reacting to such news. So what can the regulators do? Can they shut trading? No. I mean, that's disastrous, and that's not an option. I mean, imagine if the markets had shut down during COVID. I mean, I don't think we would have seen the sort of recovery and the robust markets we have today. And now, I mean, when a large group of stocks like Adani's collapse, I mean, it can hurt the rest of the market. And you can also see the markets coming down, which is exactly what we saw from January to March, I mean, possibly crashing. But as long as there is no default in the exchange and the market continues to operate normally, the regulators cannot really be pulled up for dereliction of their duties. And that way, I mean, we have seen that our market fabric has been resilient even in the toughest of times. And I think the last default was long way back. Now, I mean, when we talk of investors having incurred losses, I mean, this 4 lakh crores. But investors should know that investing in equity markets is risky, like Professor Subramanian mentioned that. I mean, they should have their own risk managements in place. I mean, we can't hold the regulators and exchange responsible for this. And again, I mean, who are the people who are lost? I mean, those who had panicked and sold off and never really bought back again. Because those who held on the Adani stocks for the last 1 year haven't really been affected so much. I mean, you look at Adani Ports, it's up 43%. If a person had held on for the last 1 year, he's 43% up today. Adani Wilmar is 35% down. Adani Enterprises and Adani Green is just about 10% down. Adani Power is 100% up. So, I mean, people haven't really lost as much as what is made out to be. And then, I mean, people who had bought it at those lower levels, I mean, they'll not run up to the regulator and say that we have made huge profits, so take it back. So you really can't have the regulator disgorge, those profits. So the question of saving investors from such crashes does not arise. I mean, it's a part of the game. Okay. But then, like I said earlier, in case the regulators are able to find out as to who the short sellers were, I think they can be disgorged. And I mean, this will make such reports coming out in future, maybe that could be a deterrent.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Ambarish Baliga and Ashok Lahiri. Earlier today, I spoke to senior advocate Mahesh Jethmalani on the Supreme Court verdict, and listen in to what he had to tell me. In fact, to put that exact number, the Indian investors lost 4 lakh crore. That's a huge number. Do you think this will set the right precedent in the interest of Indian investors, and they would be protected and cushioned against such targeted short sellers?
Yeah, the next step is what the Supreme Court, I mean, there is one final step, right, which the Supreme Court has, as I said, mandated, that there shall be an investigation, right, by SEBI and the investigating agencies of the union government, which I suppose means CBI, etc. And if there's money, if there's any money laundering involved, then the ED as well will get into the act. That there shall be a probe into whether the loss suffered by Indian investors due to the conduct of Hindenburg and other entities was an infraction of the law. So that's the step that requires to be taken to make sure that, otherwise there's, there are circuit breakers. SEBI has put many steps into place to ensure that investors don't suffer. But, sometimes it will still happen, right? As in this case, for instance. Now, in this case, there was, as you said, 4 lakh crores was the lost cause. So, an investigation by the CBI, right? I mean, this is a pure money-making operation. The upside of Hindenburg's so-called great research, the downside of Hindenburg's great research, and their money-making ability through these short-selling activities is a lost cause to investors, right? So, a probe by SEBI and the CBI investigation, whether in fact they were motivated by, a cabal in India particularly, right, is necessary to create the deterrence you talk about for the future.
Talking about, the global investors, and that brings me to my last question, Mr. Jethmalani. How will global investors react to such mature handling of the issue, one would say? Will they be more upbeat about India and its regulatory mechanism henceforth?
Look, you know, Adani is only a small part of the very resilient Indian stock markets. We have a great growth story. If the intention was to, you know, upset that apple cart, right, of those behind it, they have failed miserably. And as I said, the India story is just too good at the moment, right? And I'm sure it's going to continue for years to come for anybody to create some great macro turbulence in our stock markets, our exchanges and our economy. But there has been an attempt, at least in this Hindenburg case, and it seems to have failed. But there has been, as you pointed out, that 4 lakh crore loss to retail investors.
Yes. Mr. Jethmalani, always a pleasure to listen to you on your views on these important judgments. Thank you so much for your time.